This lecture focuses on three explorers in the Maine woods: Moses Greenleaf, Charles Jackson, and Ezekiel Holmes. These three men saw the Maine woods as a foundation for industrialization and a place of inspiration. I want to point out that the places they were exploring was not a new territory to the indigenous people of Maine. This was land that was known for generations to people who were here long before European arrival. First, I want to provide some very brief background about each of these explorers. Moses Greenleaf was a self-appointed publicist from Maine. He moved to New Gloucester, Maine from Newbury, Massachusetts. He was a land speculator, surveyor, farmer, and storekeeper. He was described as, quote, a man captivated by the potentialities of the Maine environment. He completed the 1816 Statistical Survey of Maine and the Survey of the State of Maine in reference to its geographical features, statistics, and political economy in 1829. These works took him years of research and numerous excursions into the Maine woods to complete. Charles Jackson was a geologist from Harvard. He provided the nation's first systemic geological understandings of the eastern seaboard. In 1837, he published the first report on the geology of the state of Maine, and then later volumes through 1839. Finally, Ezekiel Holmes was an agricultural reformer. He was the editor of a newspaper, The Maine Farmer, and explored the upper Penobscot River. He published the Report of an Exploration and Survey of the Territory on the Aroostook River during the spring and autumn of 1838 and 1839. I won't say much more in this lecture about Holmes, but in his report he was reading the landscape with an economic lens and considered how to make land productive and consider places where agricultural would be possible. Early surveying and geographical work in Maine done by these men was incredibly difficult. They used canoes, hired guides who pulled these canoes up rivers. They worked without maps as they were creating them. Yet their work was also remarkably thorough. In one of Jackson's publications, he noted, quote, our plan of the Aroostook is drawn on so large a scale that it would form a map 25 feet in length and thus presents ample details. Every rock, ledge, island, or other remarkable object is thus put down in very accurately, while the nature of the soil, the height of the river's banks, and the nature of the forest trees are all distinctly noted, and the houses of the settlers are all put down as they present themselves on our way. These early surveyors had some major accomplishments. They created a vision for the state's potential. They believed the future of the state lay in its geography, topography, and climate. Jackson created the state's first natural history museum, comprised of rocks, minerals, soil samples, and specimens of plants, animals, shells, and fish. These men needed to make sense of the geography known as Maine. Greenleaf argued that the state had no common center. He set out to understand the geography, its natural resources, catalog plants and animals, and arrange the landscape into useful divisions. Greenleaf believed that natural divisions separated Maine's inhabitants, and they needed to move goods from the interior to the seaboard. But how could Maine be connected? The roads at this time were poor. Severe winters, deep snows, and constant freezing and thawing was bad for roads then, much like it is today. The answer could be found in Maine's many rivers that could move goods to the coast. Greenleaf stated that, quote, the great valley of the Kennebec, Penobscot, and St. John, with their various ramifications, are so far connected with each other that in some sense they may be said to form but one irregular valley, traversing and intersecting nearly the whole state, and affording facilities for internal improvements, which at a future day will open convenient communications between its remotest parts. End quote. Holmes believed the rivers could be improved by removing boulders and building dams. In doing so, he felt more people would be inclined to settle in Maine's interior, reducing crowding along the coast. The advent of the railroad in the 19th century was another important development for moving goods through Maine. Ezekiel Holmes argued that between Aroostook and Allagash, quote, the inclination of the railway would be so gradual and slight that no fixed engine would be needed, and horsepower would be amply sufficient to transport loaded boats of considerable burthen from one lake to the other. Even though these three men were interested in the economic potential of the landscape, they also had an appreciation for its natural beauty, almost predicting the future romantic views ascribed to the Maine woods. Jackson, in his writing, vowed romance and claimed he did not, quote, distort a single fact, end quote. He avoided ornate language and stated that he, quote, let nature tell her own story, standing myself merely as the recorder and interpreter of her laws, end quote. Of West Quoddy Head in bad weather, he stated, quote, there is perhaps no other locality on the whole seacoast of the United States where the mind is more powerfully affected by the sublimity of rock scenery than at this easternmost extremity of our country. Here are lofty precipices like dark overhanging battlements, raised high in air amid the surf, bidding defiance to the storm. Nor does the changeful state of the atmosphere, with its ever-varying tint from the bright morning or roseate sunset to its thick mantling fogs, detract anything from the beauty of the scene. There is sublimity even in the sound of the fog bell, as its warning note echoes among the dark caverns and rocky crags, giving notice to the unwary mariner that he sails amid danger. But Jackson also had a commercial angle. He believed people would flock to the state to see these natural beauties and maybe decide to settle here. Jackson also presented clashing imagery. For example, of Grand Falls on the St. John River, he stated that, quote, I do not suppose that lovers of the picturesque will imagine the beauty of the falls enhanced by the erection of sawmills by its side. If they prove advantageous to the public, we must yield in matters of taste to the demands of commerce. And after all, there is nothing repulsive in the appearance of these works, and they may be shut out of the view if found to detract from its interest. In conclusion, the Maine woods was a place of speculation to these early white explorers, and they saw the future in the trees. However, as Jackson shows us, there was no agreed upon future. Should the Maine woods be a place of beauty or a place of industry? Could it be both? As Mainers struggled to answer these questions, they struggled to define the meaning of Maine.